I never believed in curses. Ghost stories were just old wives' tales meant to keep children from wandering into the unknown. Or at least that's what I thought, until I stepped foot inside La Maison de l'Ombre, the forsaken opera house on the outskirts of town. The name meant the House of Shadows, and for decades it had lived up to its reputation. No one performed there anymore. No music, no applause, just a decaying relic swallowed by darkness. But that night, under a moon too thin to offer comfort, I stood at its iron gates, staring at the grand structure that had been abandoned for nearly a century. The town whispered legends of its downfall, how the final performance ended in blood and screams. Some said the lead soprano, Marguerite Duval, had been betrayed by a jealous understudy. Others claimed a shadowy figure had been seen lurking backstage moments before the curtains fell for the last time. The truth? No one knew. The records were erased, the doors were locked, the place was left to rot. So why was I here? I was a journalist, a skeptic. And this was supposed to be my career-defining exposé, to debunk the myths surrounding this place. A few local historians agreed to meet me here at midnight for an exclusive look inside. But as I glanced at my watch, the minute hand creeping toward 12, my stomach tightened. I was alone. The wind whispered through the shuttered windows carrying a faint melody, soft, almost mournful. I shook my head. Just the wind, nothing more. Pushing open the rusted door, I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something faintly metallic. Something that reminded me of old blood. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the grand foyer, my footsteps echoing across the vast emptiness. The chandeliers, once magnificent, hung like skeletal remains. The red velvet curtains had faded to black, torn apart by time and things unseen. Dust coated everything like a funeral shroud, yet, strangely, the grand piano at the center of the stage remained untouched. Then I heard it. A soft humming voice. It didn't come from my recorder. It wasn't my own breath. It was close, too close. I froze. The sound was delicate yet chilling, like a melody half remembered from a nightmare. And then, the piano played a single note, slow and deliberate. I swung my flashlight toward the stage. Nothing, just an empty, ruined opera house. Yet the air felt different, charged with something I couldn't explain. A presence, a watcher in the dark. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't alone. I stood there, frozen, my breath trapped in my throat. The single piano note still lingered in the air, stretching longer than it should have, like a whisper refusing to fade. I swept my flashlight across the empty stage, up toward the velvet curtains swaying slightly in the stillness. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Yet the weight of something unseen pressed against me. A silent spectator in the darkness. Then I heard it again. A faint, rhythmic tapping. Like footsteps on hollow wood, it came from above. I tilted my head back, the beam of my flashlight catching the fragile remains of the grand balcony. The private box seats, once reserved for the wealthiest patrons, now loomed like gaping mouths in the darkness. My gut twisted. Was someone there? I needed to know. Taking slow, measured steps, I crossed the dust-laden floor and reached the grand staircase. The wooden railing was splintered, brittle beneath my fingers. Each step I climbed groaned under my weight, protesting my intrusion. Halfway up, I paused. A cold draft curled around me, carrying a scent that didn't belong, something sharp, bitter, and unnervingly familiar. Perfume, not old, not faded, fresh. A shiver rippled down my spine. Reaching the top, I aimed my flashlight at the ornate doors leading to the royal box, the very place where Marguerite Duval had allegedly met her grisly end. The paint had long since peeled away, revealing deep scratches in the wood, as if someone had tried, desperately, to claw their way out. I swallowed hard. The doors stood slightly ajar. Slowly, I pushed one open, the rusted hinges wailing in protest. My light spilled inside, illuminating a forgotten world trapped in time. A single red chair sat in the middle of the box, facing the stage. It was pristine, too pristine, as if someone had been sitting there moments ago. And on the chair's armrest, a fresh handprint. I took a step back, my heartbeat hammering against my ribs. The air felt electric, charged with something unnatural. Then, behind me, something shifted. A breath, a presence, too close. I spun around, nothing. Only the empty balcony, the silence pressed in, suffocating, like the opera house itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. On the opposite end of the balcony, a door stood open. One I hadn't noticed before. It led backstage. I didn't want to go in. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to leave. But the journalist in me, the part that had dragged me into this nightmare in the first place, refused to back down. So I stepped inside. The backstage corridor was narrow, lined with old dressing rooms, their mirrors shattered, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. The smell of old makeup, dust, and something rotten lingered. And then I saw it. A faded photograph, stuck to a mirror with a single rusted pin. It was of Marguerite Duval. She stood in her final costume, eyes staring directly at the camera. But something about the picture felt wrong. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she had been mid-sentence when the picture was taken. Her dress was pristine, but the reflection behind her. I leaned closer, my pulse pounding. The reflection showed something that wasn't in the original image. A shadow, tall, watching her, standing right behind her. I turned sharply, my flashlight trembling in my grip. The dressing room was empty, yet, from the mirror, a faint whisper, software cold, and it said my name. I stumbled back, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The whisper had been clear, unmistakable. My name, breathed into the cold air from lips I couldn't see. My flashlight flickered. Number not now. I smacked it against my palm, but the dimming light barely pushed back the suffocating darkness pressing in around me. The dressing room mirror stood before me, cracked and dust-coated. But something felt wrong, something more than the whisper. I turned back to the photograph of Marguerite Duval, still pinned to the glass. My breath hitched, her eyes. They had shifted. I was sure, positive, that when I first saw the image, she had been staring straight ahead. Now, her eyes were locked onto me. I reached out with trembling fingers. The moment I touched the photograph, a horrific shriek erupted through the opera house. A sound so raw, so filled with agony, that I clapped my hands over my ears. It echoed from the stage, from the halls, from the very walls themselves, as if the building had come alive with suffering. Then, the mirror shattered, not in a slow crackling spread, but in a violent explosion. Shards rained down, slicing into my arms, embedding into the wooden floor. I stumbled back, heart pounding, gasping for breath. Something had been trapped here, and I had just set it free. The shriek faded into a low, keening wail. Then footsteps, deliberate, near. I turned, my flashlight beam catching movement just outside the dressing room door. A shadow flickered across the corridor, long and distorted. But the shape, it wasn't human. I swallowed hard. My mind screamed at me to run. But where? The only way out was back through the stage, and every instinct told me something was waiting there. Then, a whisper. Software dangerously close. She suffered. Now you will too. The dressing room door slammed shut. I lunged forward, grabbing at the handle, yanking with all my strength. Locked. The temperature plummeted. My breath came out in ragged, visible puffs. The air thickened with the scent of decay and old roses. The same perfume from the balcony. Then, a pressure on my back, like fingers brushing my spine. I spun around expecting to see someone, something, but there was nothing. The dressing room lights, dead for years, flickered to life, a sickly yellow glow buzzing overhead. The bulbs pulsed like a heartbeat. And then, in the mirror's shattered remains, I saw it. Her, Marguerite Duval. Standing in the reflection, her once beautiful face twisted in grief and rage, her eyes dark and sunken, her mouth parted in a silent scream. Her dress, her elegant, pristine gown, was stained red, soaked with the blood of the past. But it wasn't just her. Behind her, looming in the darkness, stood something else. A towering, formless shadow. The same figure from the photograph. It reached for me. My body finally obeyed my instincts. I slammed my shoulder into the door, throwing my full weight against it. Once, twice. On the third hit it burst open, sending me sprawling into the corridor. The opera house had changed. The halls were no longer empty ruins. They were alive, vibrant, bathed in the flickering glow of candlelight. Phantom laughter echoed from the grand foyer, the murmurs of an audience long dead. And the stage. The stage was set for a performance. The curtains had drawn open. A single spotlight illuminated the grand piano. And standing before it, microphone in hand, was her, Marguerite. But she wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows. Faceless, distorted ghosts of a forgotten audience. They filled the seats, watching in eerie silence. The performance wasn't over. And I had just become part of the show. I stood frozen, my feet unwilling to move. My heart pounding so loudly, it drowned out the ghostly whispers filling the air. Marguerite Duval, alive in some twisted, vengeful form. Her ghostly figure gliding across the stage, her eyes locked onto me. The audience of silent, faceless phantoms stared, their gaze unwavering. My body trembled as her chilling voice rang out across the grand opera house, soft, haunting, and filled with pain. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured. Her voice sounded like it was both distant and right beside me. Faint, but sharp, every word pierced my soul. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to run. But where? The doors were no longer visible. The walls pressed in, suffocating. The air was thick, laden with the scent of old roses and decay. The chandelier above, once a magnificent symbol of wealth and power, hung crookedly, its crystals flickering with unnatural light. And then the music began. A soft, melancholy tune played on the piano, its notes floating through the air like a lullaby of death. Marguerite moved in time with the melody, her body swaying as though she was still a living, breathing woman. Until she wasn't. Her movements grew jerky and unnatural, as if she were being pulled rather than moving of her own accord. Her fingers twitched at the microphone, and her once lovely face warped with pain, her lips trembling with unsaid words. The lights around her flickered again, casting deep shadows that stretched far too long for comfort. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I realized the truth. The opera house was feeding on her grief, her anger. She was trapped, bound to the building by a curse far beyond what I could comprehend. She had died here, betrayed by those she had loved, sacrificed by the very institution that had once adored her. Her death was no accident. It had been orchestrated, a ritual of betrayal to claim her soul in exchange for the eternal fame of the house itself. The room spun. The walls began to close in, the air growing heavier with each breath I took. I could feel the building shifting, as if it were alive, reacting to the curse that had tied itself to me the moment I set foot inside. I had invoked it. I had come for the truth. But now, I was part of the performance. Her voice cut through the oppressive silence again, soft but sharp. You wanted to know, didn't you? Now you will. You are part of my story. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The ghosts in the audience began to stir, their faces warped, twisted, and formless. Hollow eyes staring at me with hunger. A low, guttural hum reverberated through the theater, making the floor beneath me vibrate. I could feel the cursed energy radiating from the stage, coursing through the building's bones. And then, in a split second, the room went silent. Marguerite stood still, her head tilted slightly, as if listening for something. Her eyes flickered from me to the empty seats of the opera house, as though the audience itself was whispering to her. The piano's tune had stopped, replaced by a faint, chilling sound. The sound of scratching. I turned toward the source, my pulse racing. The walls were covered in faint scratches, each line more desperate than the last, as if something, or someone, was trying to claw its way out of the dark corners of the house. I could almost hear their pain, feel their hunger. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the stillness. One of the doors at the back of the theater burst open. I turned just in time to see a figure emerge, a tall, faceless shape, moving with inhuman speed. Its limbs were twisted, elongated in a grotesque imitation of a person. The creature moved toward the stage, its body bending and contorting unnaturally. My breath caught in my throat. It was as if the building had created this thing, its anger manifesting in some physical, horrific form. The energy in the room was electric, like the house was alive, hunting, pulling the soul of its latest victim into its depths. Marguerite's eyes fixed on me once more, and I felt the sharp tug of her rage wrap around my chest, tightening like a noose. "Now you see it," she whispered, her voice growing louder, more urgent, more desperate. "You are part of this place now. You will never leave. This house will feed on your fear, just as it has fed on mine." I tried to back away, but the force of the house, of the curse, pushed me forward, toward the stage. The audience's silent gaze was suffocating. The shadows seemed to reach out toward me, dragging me deeper into the building, pulling me into the performance. Suddenly, the shadows rose from the floor, swirling and twisting into forms. They came together to form bodies, audience members, their faces obscured by darkness, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They reached out, grabbing at my limbs, pulling me into their throng. I screamed, thrashing against their cold, ghostly grip, but it was no use. The shadows had consumed me, pulling me closer to Marguerite. The air was thick with desperation. Marguerite's voice, the screams of the tormented souls. And I realized with a sickening certainty, I wasn't just trapped in the opera house, I had become a part of its curse. Marguerite's twisted, sorrowful eyes locked onto mine once again. She reached out, her fingers brushing my cheek with a coldness that froze my very soul. Her lips parted in a silent scream, and then nothing. The darkness swallowed her whole. And then I became part of the performance.